John Wick Chapter 3 once again tries to up the ante with spectacular action set pieces and intricate world building, but for the first time in the series, there are a few stumbles along the way. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me, as always, is David.
CVC Passum Parabellum.
I really thought you were going to go with I Serve, and I
mean, it was 50-50. It was 50-50, but I really wanted to go with the Latin there.
All right. Because they said the Serve thing a few times. That came up a number of times. But yeah, so we, of course, are a movie podcast. We're working through the John Wick franchise right now. This is going to be John Wick 3 Parabellum. I will say, when they eventually said Parabellum with the subtitles, and the subtitles have been kind of this stylish thing that all the entries have had, I was like, oh, okay, that's what the Parabellum comes. That's actually kind of neat. Okay,
I like the fact that it gives a setting of, okay, here's what Parabellum means, but I also dislike the fact that so far this is the only John Wick, including 4 coming out next week.
See if they had subtitles from like this one on, I'd be like, okay, I can live with that. But the fact that it just went back to subtitleless with Chapter 4 is, on an OCD level, is a little annoying. But
it's the sort of thing where like you're gonna have the spines of all the movies lined up on like your shelf, and then that one's just gonna be ever so slightly different. You're like, hate it.
Son of a bitch. So yes, John Wick 3. This is the one that I hadn't seen. I'd seen the first 2 before.
Same.
So this was a first time thing. Well, you hadn't seen any of them, right? So this was.
Oh yeah, but I still haven't seen it.
But yeah, so it picks up pretty much right after the end of the second movie. Obviously, we'll start spoiler free for this movie, but there may be some spoilers for 2 and 1 because inherently it follows straight on from those. So I think it'll be hard to not talk about those 2 a little bit. But yeah, so the end of the second movie, of course, John Wick was excommunicado. Big contract going out on him in an hour's time. Where
I like how you say there might be spoilers, and then you just say the big thing at the end.
Well, that's just how the movie starts. He's on the run because
right.
the clock's ticking down to when all the assassins are going to come after him. Like, it's kind of it's the thing. It's the only thing I can say about this one.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It has to happen, but it's just.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was accurate. There may be spoilers. Yeah. There was. I was covered. But yeah, that's where the movie starts off, and John Wick's on the run, and we see just how he's going to tackle this situation. And there's obviously more stuff. That's all I'm really going to say premise-wise before we, eventually get to the spoilers.
Yeah, honestly, this movie, in terms of like getting into the plot and like what he actually does, I think it lasts maybe like 5 minutes. It gives like zero setup. It just expects you to have seen the last movie, and it's like, okay, good, hit the ground running. Let's go.
And I think in a world where it's so easy to watch stuff on streaming or rent stuff online, it's like almost more understandable that they expect you to just catch up.
Yeah.
And it's, and I think in a single movie series, it's relatively reasonable to expect that. I think it gets a bit murkier when you have like the MCU, where at this point we're 30 movies in, and there's like 10 TV shows now, and it's like, no, this is actual homework. This is a third job, keeping up with all this shit.
I think that it's one thing to expect if you go in to see a Chapter 3 or a 3 any movie. You're expected to see 1 and 2. But like, yeah, MCU, if you go into Ant-Man, maybe you didn't see Avengers. Maybe you didn't see Doctor Strange because you only would have been expected to see the first Ant-Man.
I mean, I think Avengers is a weird choice because that's the one that I assume everyone will have seen. But yeah, I get your meaning. Like, you go to see Ant-Man 3. Oh, you didn't watch WandaVision? Well, sucks to be you because you won't understand why this is happening.
See, you say that, but I have yet to see Doctor Strange 2, and I feel like WandaVision may have been required for that.
It was, yes. But anyway, this is John Wick Chapter 3.
Yes.
We're going to get into it, and we'll give our thoughts and feelings, and we'll talk about all the things that we talk. Like, I mean, there's kind of a structure that I talk about movies anyway. Typically, there's a list of things that I'll go through in the spoiler-free section, which is, general feelings, the cast, the direction, and then whatever else is relative. So, in this case, action set pieces and that kind of thing. And then we get into the spoilers. So, but I feel like because we're doing this series, we're very specifically talking about the exact same categories each time because they're always valid and they're worth comparing to the previous movies. But Yeah, we'll get into it. So, David, that's your name.
Yes.
What is your feelings on John Wick 3 Parabellum?
Well, after 21 episodes, I'm glad you remember my name. This.
But sometimes my humor is lost on people. Okay, that was an intentional little rib. Okay,
I gotcha. Okay, so the last movie I gave a little bit of flack for in that I felt that the choreography was slightly lacking, just in terms of the first movie felt like pretty much a dance, where this one felt more reliant on the setting itself. I think this movie increased the choreography. I don't think it was reliant on the setting anymore. It got back to where I feel the first movie was. That being said, what I praised the last movie for was the tight-knit plot and how I felt that everything made sense of one right after another after another. This one felt a bit looser in that regard. This one felt a bit more of go to A so you can go to B, and then at B he's told go to C, and then once he's at C he says go to D, and it just kind of is this long scavenger hunt that it felt like John is being dragged through rather than wanting to actively make it from A to B to C in order to complete a larger goal. Yes, there is a larger goal he's going after, but it feels like it changes slightly over the course of each time he gets to a new checkpoint.
Yeah. I mean, on the action front, like I would say that it still uses its environment. I think it just marries the environment and the choreography even more. Yeah. Arguably, the action's at its peak for certain sequences in this movie. It feels like they're just having fun and like sort of figuring out new ways to be inventive and do new things. With in some cases, it's just like, okay, this time he has a partner for a scene. This time we're using a motorbike. This time we're using lots of knives. Like, you know, there's just moments like that where it's like, okay, they're being inventive. They're thinking of new situations. And even when you think something might be similar to a previous scene in one of the other movies, because, oh, there's a lot of glass in this room. Is that just going to be like the Hall of Mirrors from the second one? No, it felt completely different and distinct. They used it in a completely different way, and it felt like the glass was much more of a practical part of it rather than just being a setting. So, action, great. I do agree I have some plot issues with this one, or maybe mythology issues is maybe a better way. I kind of agree with the go to A to B to C, and each time it's like, here's your new sort of direction. I think this one has a pacing problem again. It's not the same pacing problem as the first movie where that crescendoed too early and had like this after part. I think this one dips in the middle, and I think it dips along with the mythology problem I have, which is just generally... It gets a little too fantastical almost with some of its lore. Like, I think in the second movie, it was building this mythology of this world that he's in, and it always felt like it was based in somewhat relative grounded world with rules and all that stuff. And there's a point in this movie, and I won't spoil the context of it, but I'll just say there's a very Lawrence of Arabia moment of like John Wick going through a desert, searching for like the magical person who could. And I'm like, what are we doing? I don't like this.
Yeah, that's the one point where it felt like it was like, all right. In the first movie, we set up this vague higher power, this vague governing body.
Yeah.
In the second movie, they really elaborated on that. They really said, here's how the governing body works, and it's very laid out. And this one, they said, okay, we've already established the governing body. How do we build it even higher? And what it basically comes down to is the governing body has their own governing body. And it's like, well, all right, then just what are we doing anymore?
Yeah, I didn't like it. Honestly, like, I think the first half hour of action is fantastic. I think once John kind of goes more on the run properly and like travels after that, I think it lulls, and I don't necessarily. Don't get me wrong, there's a fun action scene in the middle of it with like I won't get into it too much, but there's a partner and like, even some dogs involved. That action scene's pretty good, but everything else kind of around this like portion of his story in the movie, where he's in Casablanca and then he goes to the desert and all that stuff. That for me is it's like a 40-minute chunk. It's a good hefty chunk of the movie. I think that is like a very big low point for me, and I was a little bit worried because I thought, I don't know if this is going to claw it back for me. Luckily, I do think the last act and what it does plot-wise at that point, I do think is quite good and interesting, and makes an interesting pivot in like what John is expected to do and kind of like where it goes.
I agree. It goes back to what we were saying before about how it sets up the rules and then breaks them so that we get new interesting types of combat out of that. I do think that what is primarily the main antagonist group of the movie, by the time we reach the end, kind of feels like shouldn't they all be dead by now?
Yeah, I get that. I do think a couple of the key villains that are introduced in this in different roles, I don't think they're that great. I think they're kind of like just serviceable for what they are in the plot. There's the adjudicator, who I think is just that they're trying really hard to make her come across as like super in power and evil and whatever, and I just kind of feel like it was trying too hard with her.
I didn't feel like she was in power, but I felt she was just the person with the rule book who it's like, look, I don't care like what specifically happens, but I'm here to lay down the law when you break the rules. And it's not even them personally. It's just they make a call and have someone else come in and do it.
I think it was just the way like the way like the aura around her was treated when she came into the scenes and things like that. I wasn't quite feeling. I felt like it was just trying a bit too hard with her, I thought.
For some reason, she had the same aura for me that I just imagined her as like a kid, like being a dungeon master, and she's like, well, actually the rules say that you can't do that on your turn.
I wasn't really feeling her. There's sort of like a rival assassin who's kind of the main one for this movie, Zero, who like he's fine, but I don't think he had the presence that maybe the movie wanted him to have.
It took me a full hour of this movie to figure out where I saw him before.
Oh, what was he in before?
He is like the main host presenter guy on Iron Chef, who goes way over the top like all the time.
That makes his introduction make more sense to me, though.
Yeah.
Telling me that, because he is introduced as a chef, so fair enough. Okay.
I just remember there's a meme where like the secret ingredient they have to use is beer somehow in their meal, and he just goes way over the top. Like he's like, and the secret ingredient is, and then there's all the big music. It unveils and he goes, beer! And I'm like, yep, that's the guy.
He's a bit jovial in this for like the rival assassin, you know?
So I did want to ask you about that. Yes, he's the rival assassin. For 3 movies now, including this one, you've been asking for the anti-John Wick. Do you feel that he's reached? Because he certainly feels he reached that. He feels like he's the anti-John Wick.
No, I don't think we've reached it yet. I don't think we've reached the equal to John Wick yet, which is actually almost impressive that they've went 3 movies and not given me that ultimate badass, like evil version of John Wick who's going to go toe to toe with him. It's actually impressive they're not went to that well, which it's still open for 4 and 5. So
I was gonna say you'll see what happens next week with it.
Go for it. I do think where this leaves off for the next movie is quite interesting. It's definitely clear they expected to get one because it is very much set up stuff at the end. And maybe that's like the ultimate criticism of it, is that I felt 2 worked really well as a movie on its own, but then also set up this really cool idea for the 3rd one. This one I felt like it was dealing with the ending of 2 and setting up 4, and had some great action in it, but like the actual plot I don't think was all that satisfying on its own, especially in the middle, like I said.
Yeah, there was no point in this movie where you felt it could have just completely been the end of the story.
Yeah.
Like by the time they were done wrapping up with 2, they were already setting up 4.
Yeah. So I think, and that is a bit of an indictment, and I think 2 is still, if anything, I think 2 is more satisfying than 1 is as a full meal, as a full chapter of the story. Whereas this one feels like it is a bit more kind of an in-between movie, which is kind of a shame. I was kind of this hoping that I was going to just feel like it was, and I still like it. I still like a lot of what's in it, and I'm still, into it for 4. Like this has not put me in a negative place for 4. Like I think 4 could very well equally. This might be a franchise where we come out of it and go, yeah, all the even numbered ones. Like those are the best ones, and and that happens sometimes. Like people say that about Star Trek, that the even numbered ones are by and large the better ones, but with an odd exception here or two. But so it's interesting to see. Halle Berry's in this as well, of course, and we'll get to her role properly in spoilers. Traditionally not a good actress, to be honest. She's I
mean, she's obviously had enough success that she is considered to still be a grab when you can get her, but yeah, there's a lot more misses than hits.
Yeah, I guess she was just kind of this, big star, maybe for her modeling rather than her acting when she first kind of came into things.
Yeah, it struck me Halle Berry being in this movie the same sort of way that like Clint Eastwood was in Dirty Harry, and the same way that I feel like Keanu Reeves honestly was at the beginning of this franchise, where it's just, hey, I kind of want to reinvent myself as just the badass again. Can I get back to that?
Yeah, don't get me wrong, I do think some of the world building is still interesting in that it does feel like he's got a couple of characters around the world now who might pop back in later and like help in a future movie, and that is kind of interesting, and I appreciate that.
I think what this movie does the most in terms of the other characters is it basically shows that, yes, John Wick was an insatiable badass who killed everyone that he was hired to kill, but he also did favors along the way. He also built up goodwill in just the general community.
Yeah.
Because everyone seems to owe him something.
Yeah, so, I mean, as far as anything else goes, like, cinematography's still very much on point. There's some great sequences, especially early on. There's some really unique locations for fight scenes, I would say. Later on, there's some more elaborate locations that they've designed. Like I say, the room that's all glass, for example. Like, it feels like they were like, you're not into that? Not into the glass?
I don't know. It struck me the same sort of way as like the Hall of Mirrors scene. I know you say it's different, and it is different in how they deal with it, but it just struck me as like, we just want to make it, even if it makes no sense as to why they're there, we want to make it a cool thing that they can do. And it does look cool. It's great. But like the only reasoning we get is that I think Winston says at one point, it's like, this room was made when it is absolutely critical that everyone's hands are able to be seen, and like there's nothing that's under the table. I guess, but it just seems like, okay, you don't have to justify having a cool looking room. Like, I get it. You want to just fight in this area.
So you would have just preferred that he had not said that. Like, it's just here, that's it.
I don't know if I would have preferred he'd not said it, but the fact that he did say it drew my attention to the fact of, okay, but like, is there really justification for
honestly,
like the doors and all this stuff outside the actual meeting room? All the stairs have to be glass as well. Like everything has to be glass.
Honestly, I have less a problem with this room because at least it's a secretive room. My bigger problem with the Continental in this one is that there's now this sort of big lobby area that's like a train station that I don't remember like ever feeling like it was there in the first two movies.
Yes, I agree. I always assumed that like the main hallway, because we always pretty much got the same like 2-3 shots in that main hallway. We got from Charon's point of view down the hall, and then we got them walking up it in the other direction, and then they were just sent off to other areas of the Continental. I feel like this is the first time that we've actually seen the side angle where it's, oh no, there is this big open space that we have just neglected to talk about, because most hotel lobbies are pretty big.
Yeah, they typically have a lot of room for traffic, foot traffic going through and stuff. I won't spoil what it is yet. I'll save it for spoilers, but I will say there is a moment in this where they straight up have Keanu quote himself from The Matrix, and and I'm not gonna lie, like I think if you told me he was going to do that, I'd have rolled my eyes. I actually think in the moment it kind of works.
I mean, I specifically wrote it down because I thought it was a moment that it fits in perfectly to what the scene needs.
Yeah, contextually it completely worked, and it felt like, we're gearing up for Act 3, and I like the gearing up for Act 3. This is the weird thing about this, is that I think Act 1 and 3 are really strong, and I really enjoyed them for the action. I enjoyed them for the interplay of John Wick and the characters that he's been around for the previous movies. The new characters I don't really like that much, which isn't a big deal, is because they're just there to be, to fight anyway, for the most part. But that middle act, and that's the biggest part, unfortunately, is this journey to Casablanca and then the journey to see someone in the desert. And it all just feels like there's a moment where he's talking to this person that he's been going to see in the desert, and he's like, we're in a tent in the desert, and he's I don't know, I just like all of it just feels a bit too gimmicky and fantastical in a way that I don't think fits with what I felt I liked about this franchise.
Yeah, that really is the thing, is that the whole movie, it builds itself, even within this movie, but the franchise overall builds itself on procedure, builds itself on rules, and especially this movie leans into how important the rules are. But then when it comes to that character in the desert, it just kind of goes to a, you'll know it when you feel it sort of thing, and it just seems so out of place.
It just feels like it's a villain who's in charge of the world, who can make decisions in a way that it kind of goes against when we thought the table was the head of all this, right? And now there's a person above the table. It kind of felt like, okay, there's these rules in place that they all follow, and it's kind of this system where everyone at the table presumably is equal, and that's kind of what makes it interesting. Whereas here, this felt a bit more like, I don't know, going to see the king and like asking for a decision on something, and it felt, I don't know.
Yeah, it struck me in the same sort of way as, like, I guess if we're going by like actual government terms, there's a difference between like the legislative house or parliament, and then there's the president slash king or queen, where there's someone who's just above that other decision making ability, because you need to have there be someone who can make a fast decision, someone who can make the like break ties and stuff like that, who can deal with any infighting. And I get that from a like a lore building perspective, it makes sense to have that, but I don't like how they just made him this fantastical element.
Yeah, no, like see if it was just a guy in like a tower in like a city, right? And they didn't treat it like, because even the guy that they go see before him, like the one that Halle Berry used to work for, and it's the place that makes the coins and the little, what do you call them, the markers.
The markers. Yeah.
Like even him, I thought was a bit over the top. Like the way he had like the first coin that they ever made on display, and he kind of talked about it as if it was poetic. I was like, I don't know, you're kind of losing me a little bit here. This guy's a little bit, again, just too. He's waxing lyrically about like the history of this, and it feels a little bit less.
I mean, that one actually kind of worked for me, because what we set up in the last movie was that we had the one woman going to her ceremony to be basically brought into the high table, and it was this big showy thing. It was concerts and raves and all that. It struck me more as the higher you get up this hierarchy, the less you actually really deal with the inner workings of it, the more you're just kind of sitting above it and you just enjoy the high life, more or less. So it made sense to me that he's, waxing poetically. He spends his money on these trivial things and whatnot. He feels above the entire system. That much worked for me. What got me, though, is that, like I said, by the time we got up to the highest on highs, the one above the table, it didn't strike me as him being above everything. It struck me more as him being completely outside it. It was he was not even within the same game we've been playing all along.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
One comparison I think that did it well, and this is a strange thing to bring up. Did you watch the Pirates movies?
I saw the first one, and maybe the second.
So in the third one, they get this whole Council of Pirates thing going on, and it's, a little weird. It does whatever, but there's one guy who comes in, and he's essentially just the one who makes sure that the rules are followed. He's kind of like the educator in this movie. But he stays out of everything else. He lets the council do their own thing. It's only once they start suggesting that the rules are broken that he stands up, and he doesn't even say anything, but just his presence is menacing. It causes everyone else to back down, and they immediately say, okay, no, rules need to be followed. That's how I feel that the guy above the table should have been here, where he's just a menacing presence. Instead, we got this weird sort of like almost deity sort of figure instead.
Yeah, I didn't like how they handled this character at all, and I wasn't super into the guy they went to see before this that I mentioned either. But it felt like it was going down this rabbit hole of being more almost mystical, and it's not actually mystical, but it kind of presents it in a mystical way, where it's like, go through the desert, and when you get to the edge of the desert, look up to the sun, and he shall respond. And I'm like, just piss off! Like, I hate this. There's actual things in the middle of this movie that I was actively kind of hating, which is a shame, because once it gets back to New York City, once it gets back to sort of the more brass tacks of like making choices and where do we stand in this like system and conflict and all that, like I was like, okay, I'm more into this again, and I like these decisions that are being made. So, I guess we'll get into spoilers. I don't know if there's much more we can talk about without getting into the meat of it.
The only thing, I said this in the last movie with the mirrors and all that, is that you can tell that there must have been a lot of VFX artists in order to scratch out all of the cameras that must have been appearing in reflections. I feel like they just hired on everyone again. They're like, hey guys, remember how we made you deal with all the reflections in glass? Boy, how do we have a job for you. And I gotta say, there was nothing in this movie, save for one particular sequence, that I think the VFX really stood out for. And the sequence that kind of made me pause and say, all right, that's a bit much, is the motorcycle ninja sequence.
Yeah, well, there was a couple of moments when he was on the motorbike where either I was noticing a stunt double for Keanu Reeves, or I was noticing just some wonky deepfake where they were trying to make it Keanu Reeves.
Yeah.
Either way, there was something off about the face that was sticking out to me.
It wasn't even the face so much for me. It was just the general action overall. Like, it felt kind of rubbery in a way.
Okay.
That I can't exactly say what it was, but it was just too much in something. And that was the only part where I feel like, they literally could not have done this 100% practically. Yeah. It is completely unfeasible. But I feel like they relied a bit too much on the VFX for it.
That's probably fair. There are parts of that chase scene that I do like, and I'll talk about that when we get to it. But I get what you're saying overall. Like, it had to be a bit more effects heavy just because of what it is.
Yeah.
And so. But yeah, we'll get into things. So, full spoilers for John Wick Chapter 3. You have been warned. So, yeah, the movie starts off. He's running in the rain with the dog. He quite quickly gets rid of the dog, though. He pays a taxi driver to take the dog to the Continental.
Why do we even have the dog? Like, when they were writing this script, they must have known. They needed to be known, this is where we're going with the next chapter. Why did he get the dog back? That's the part that gets me.
I don't know either. But he's like, no, the dog needs to be kept safe while I go off and do whatever I'm doing to survive. And he runs quickly to the library, the big New York library, and he asks for a specific book. He's got something stashed in a book in the library, some book that no one would ever check out. He's got some stuff stashed. He's got his marker, a couple of coins, and the cross that he's going to use for something. And we get
a picture of his wife.
And a picture of his wife, which, I'll be honest, at this point, it does come up a bit more later, but at this point I was sort of thinking to myself, like, you know what, the death of your wife at this point feels so far removed from whatever we're doing now. Like,
well, we actually didn't mention it last movie, but his phone that he watched all the videos on got broken in the middle of one of the fights. So he actually does not have any current way to remember his wife outside of that, like in any sort of physical means.
Yeah. Now it's just his mind. It's just his memory of her that he's got, effectively, which does come up later on. But we get our first fight scene in the library where there's like maybe 10 minutes left on this hour before it starts, where everyone's allowed to go after him. And this big guy shows up, and he's just kind of like, you know what, it's close enough. No one will know that I was early. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, if it's close enough and no one's here to see it, then yeah, you could argue. Like the forensics can only get it so close if they even bother to check. Like,
and I'm sure they wouldn't.
Yeah. So we get this fight, which, I enjoy this fight scene, particularly how it ends, because this is how you use a book in a very inventive way. So John Wick uses a book. First of all, he does that thing where he sort of hammers it in with his hand, but he does it into the guy's mouth. So he's got the book in the guy's mouth, and he hammers it in, and the guy's mouth looks a bit like his jaw's maybe broken or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And then it ends with him placing the book on a table, putting the guy's neck onto the book, and then punching him so hard in the head that it breaks his neck.
Yep.
I enjoyed this. I cannot say that it was not inventive. It was different from anything in the past couple of movies.
Is this how you properly do a library research scene? Is this it?
Yes, this is a good library research scene.
Yep. It is worth noting during that fight scene, the guy pulls a knife and stabs John in the shoulder, which John goes through the entire fight just being like, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. And it's only once the scene is done where he's like, crap, ow, that kind of hurt.
Do you know, that actually strikes me as believable because of the adrenaline. Like, I buy that you wouldn't notice it too much until you have a time to stop and process it.
It does, and I 100% am okay with it, but we get to a certain point in these movies where I think John might have that neurological disease where, like, he just can't feel pain.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if anything, it's the only way he could do this.
Yeah.
is if he's not feeling pain, because he goes through a lot of shit over the course of these movies. So yeah, he does this, and then he goes to like the doctor that I think we saw in the previous movie.
I think it's the same like character. I don't think it's the same guy.
Oh, fair enough. But he's like, please, I need this like wound stitched up. He's like, no, sorry, I can't. Like they'll be mad if I do it. He's like, no, I've got 5 minutes left. I can. You're good for 5 minutes. So the clock runs out while he's putting the stitches in, and then John has to finish the stitches on his own. But the doctor still points out where the medication is that he can take and insists that John shoot him a couple times so that it doesn't look like he just helped him. And John does so.
I feel like that scene's pretty much a comedy beat because he's just basically telling John, it's like, yeah, go ahead and shoot me right under the rib, but make sure you don't hit the okay.
Yeah. But this is the thing, they've set up John Wick so well that I believe he actually did follow his instructions and made sure they weren't, fatal or ultra damaging wounds. Like, he knew where to shoot.
Yeah, absolutely.
He knew what he was doing. So, I mean, yeah, he's racing around. There's more guys start chasing him. He ends up in a stable where the carriages for the city are.
First is the pawn shop fight, or the...
Oh, is that first? The knives?
Yeah, the knife fight.
Oh, so, well, yeah, because there's, like, classical guns, and he's looking for a gun, and he gets, like, one shot after he reassembles a gun out of this old, six-shooter.
I feel like that scene was... Because obviously Keanu went through a whole bunch of training on, like, guns and stuff like that for all of these movies. Mm-hmm. I feel like that scene was purposely made of, like, watch how fast he can reassemble this gun just for this one shot. We're not going to use it again, but we're just going to take the time to show how good with arms he's gotten.
I like how you said it's just for one shot. That applies to both the gun firing one bullet and also one shot in the movie.
Yeah, exactly.
But he ends up in the hallway in here that's just like a bunch of cases to the left and right, which are all full of like knives and swords and various things. And it becomes this thing where he's fighting, and you're thinking, okay, we've seen him use a knife before, because he's done that thing in every movie. And he does it here eventually as well, where he hammers it into someone to stab them. But this scene is like, no, this is all knives. And they even have like the beat where they pause in mid-fight and then both smash like the glass to get some knives. And we get to a point where not only is he stabbing people with knives, and he's using like, one dude to block the other dude when he's throwing knives at him, he's basically just firing knives so quickly at people that it's almost like a gunshot, where he's just like throwing knives, and we get one guy's like just like riddled in knives, and another guy gets riddled in knives, and then the scene ends with him just slowly putting a knife into a guy's eye. So it's like almost a horror movie moment where he's the gore of the knife get out of the eye. Maybe honestly, this may be my favorite action scene in the whole movie, is this knife scene.
Yeah, no, it's super high octane, and what I really like about it is that it's obvious that John is not like super proficient at this stuff. He's good. He's able to make it work, but like a lot of the knives he throws just end up hitting hilt first, and they just bounce off the guys. And it's only like a couple shots that really land. It's only once he's able to use other people as shields and then get back into close combat that he's actually effective at taking these guys out.
I really like that, actually, that not every knife lands blade first, so there's kind of like a success rate to it. It's the same thing later on, actually, when he's fighting guys in body armor, where he's shooting them, but he realizes quickly that the bullets are just kind of bouncing off, so he has to like aim for the neck and stuff like that, where the armor's at their weakest, because that's where they have to be able to move. So it becomes this strategical thing of like trying to find the right spot to shoot them. This was kind of the same thing with the knives. It's like, oh no, it's not going to work every time. He has to kind of keep trying at it. But it feels like he gets more successful as the scene goes on, though. It feels like by the time you get to the end of the scene, he's starting to like get a feel for it. So he's like throwing them better.
I feel like that's probably like, if John had to have a superpower, that's the thing, is that he's just extremely effective at learning how weapons work and how to properly use them.
Yeah, so all that stuff is great, and then he ends up in the stables, and he's fighting guys in and around the horses, and he does this twice where he like slaps a horse so that the horse will kick its back legs and just F someone. Obviously there's a visual effect here to do this because you couldn't do it otherwise, but it looks good, and it's a really funny death. It's a good way to kill someone.
I really also appreciate at this point in the movie is that he's in New York City.
Yes.
Like, they obviously had this idea of, let's have him use horses as a weapon, and they just had to figure out how to make that work. And obviously there are like police that use horses in New York. There are like carriage rides and stuff like that. Horses do exist in central New York City. I like the fact that they thought of that rather than just saving it for a later scene where it would make more sense that there would be horses around, because there are plenty of later scenes that would make more sense. But they took the time to be like, no, this is clearly where the horses are supposed to be coming from. They make it make sense rather than it just being like, and in the middle of New York, a random stable.
Yeah, and it also kind of fits with the theme of the idea of like the Continental and this like underworld of assassins in the city. The idea that in the middle of the city there was actually a stable, and it's for reasons because there's horse carriage rides that go around Central Park or whatever else. There's a reason for it, but it's the idea that there's this relic in the middle of the city of this olden time are surrounded by the modern metropolis of New York. I think it kind of almost fits the idea of like the central assassins like building in the middle of the city that's surrounded by the regular world. I don't know, there's something like that. Don't get me wrong, we're at a point in this movie where there's so many hidden assassins that it's starting to feel like there's more assassins in the world than there are regular people, but that's
That was pretty much the entire final scene in the last movie. It's like, okay, everyone here, cool, great, awesome. That was one thing in this movie that I do appreciate, is the fact that there are plenty of places he goes, and it's full of people, I mean, that are in on this, that are in this world. But I feel like there are just as many, especially when he comes back to New York at the end of the movie, that are just bystanders. And we finally do get that scene of what happens if the bystanders get in the way of an attack, which I think says more about John as a character in this world than it does anything else that they do.
Yeah, I almost, like, this first half hour of the movie almost makes me wish it was a simpler plot where you can still sort of end, like, the third act can mostly still be the same, but I almost wish it was just a gauntlet of him getting through the city, like, back to the Continental, with him, like, going through these varieties of locations and, like, finding himself with different styles of weaponry, different locations, different types of people that are coming after him. And because when he leaves this scene and he's on the horse, and we get like a horse chase scene where he literally like sort of slides and sort of is alongside the horse as it's riding and shoots from underneath the horse's neck to get the guy in the motorbike. It's a really inventive, like, fun moment, and it's like, it does have that kind of, like, you're treating this horse like it's like I don't know, like you're on the side of a car or something, the way you're hanging off of it. It looked cool, it was fun.
Yeah, no, there was a webcomic I read, God knows how long ago, which basically was stating how, I think it was Crank was the movie that just came out, and they were like, yeah, I like Crank, but it wasn't enough action. And they're like, what do you mean? Crank is like all action all the time. It's like, no, it's like certain percentage is just talking. And the movie that they said in the webcomic was Summer Glau just goes and beats up everybody. Like, because I guess they really like Summer Glau as an actress. I feel like that's what this movie probably should have been, is just, literally everyone is after John. And like you said, he just needs to go through the gauntlet. And the movie, yes, it can pause for plot-related reasons. Yes, there can be, like, talking scenes regarding his excommunication, and as we see later, other characters getting in trouble for helping him. But the movie, like you said, during that second act, takes just too long of a pause in the action itself.
Yeah, because as soon as he walks into that Russian ballet theater, it just kind of like comes to this grinding halt, and it's kind of a shame. And I feel like, if you just have this gauntlet of him going through the city, keep it a bit simpler, keep him in this kind of setting that, clearly this movie shows in this opening half hour that there's so much variety that you can do in the setting of a city like New York. There's so many things and places you can go through that I don't think it would have ever gotten dull in that sense. And instead we go on this mystical journey of him trying to find,
like, if the entire goal of the movie was him to get to Casablanca, get to a place that he believes is safe for whatever reason, I think that would have been a much better overall plot, rather than he gets there for the second act and then he's trying to, basically this movie, what we want from it is him getting to safety is the overall goal, where the movie decides, no, that's the first act goal, and the overall goal is him setting up a more permanent form of safety.
Well, here's the thing, right? So, no, I'll save this for later. I'll save it for when we're talking about the third act. But, so yeah, he basically, he's got his ticket. We find out that he come up through this Russian sort of like training facility.
We have an actual name for him of Jardani Janovich.
I was going to go with John Wick, thank you very much, but yes.
Fair enough. I find it surprising that this character has just a totally different name, and he chose the name John Wick at some point.
You can hear John Wick in that. You can see where it comes from that name. Like, that's kind of in there. But he, he's punching his ticket, as you say, and she doesn't want to help him, this woman that runs the place, but ultimately she'll accept it, give him safe passage to Casablanca. And obviously we see that they're training all these other young soldiers. It's very Black Widow.
The Red Room.
The Red Room, yeah. It's boys and girls, sure, but it's very much that.
Notably, ballerinas.
Yes, which obviously sets up the spin-off that we're going to get later on. So he goes off and does that, and we're introduced to the adjudicator who comes in and basically tells Winston that because he didn't shoot John Wick on the spot when he broke the rules, that she he has to step down. He has to give up the Continental. He's got a week to sort of like hand in his papers and move on. And I guess what I was going to say before actually is that if the whole thing in the third act is about coming back to the Continental, and obviously later on it's because he's tasked with killing Winston to sort of earn his, not freedom, he's still going to be like part of the table and like work for
his life.
But earn his life, yeah, like sort of take away the hit job. I think all you do to sort of reshape it a little bit is that you have John Wick fighting to get out of the city, go through his gauntlet, and at the end of Act 2, he still does some of the other stuff in the other scenes. He finds out just as he's about to leave and be scot-free that they're going to go after Winston because Winston's been basically getting out of trouble and he's going to be killed for helping him and giving him that hour of like, a chance to get away. Have him make the choice there to turn back because Winston's his friend. And then the rest of the movie where they're going to do the whole siege and like protecting the Continental can still happen. Almost the exact same. And then even the ending with where it goes, which we'll get to, would hit maybe even harder because John Wick would have made that choice in the first place. So I don't think it even takes that much to sort of just redo this a little bit and just take out all the stuff I don't like. That's the sad part, is I can very quickly just rewrite it to get rid of all that crap.
Like I could, if the whole goal is him to get on a plane or something like that, because there's one point where she specifically says like ready the lifeboat or ready the life raft or something like that. If the whole point is get to that location and then he's, about to step on it, he does whatever, and then all of a sudden he gets a call or some notice from somebody that the Continental has been deconsecrated, immediately it makes sense for him to then go back. I think that's, especially because then, I mean, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but John makes the choice when he's with the Elder to give up his own life in the form of being a servant of the High Table for the rest of his natural born days. And then the very first thing they ask him to do, he says, no, I don't wanna. So it does feel like that plot point is just completely lost.
Yeah,
I think it actually makes more sense to cut it than it does to keep it in as is.
I also didn't really like just him doing that in the first place. It kind of felt weird to me that he was basically begging to like, hey, don't take off the hit, keep me safe. And later on he justifies it by saying he's trying to keep alive just so he can remember his wife. That's all it is. He just wants to remember her and keep her memory alive in him. And it just kind of felt like, I don't know, it felt like he was, I don't think at the end of the second movie, it felt like when he was on the run, it felt like, okay, there's this threat, everyone's going to come for him, he's going to go and try and survive somehow. I would never have predicted at the end of the second movie that his goal to try and survive is to go and just beg the boss for his life and like, please, don't.
Well, it raises that thing during the second movie. I think we pointed out there is a point in there where he could just stop. Yeah. Like he completed the marker. There are people trying to kill him to tie up loose ends or whatever, but he could have, at a certain point, have just stopped. Even the very end of the movie, right before he shoots, what's his name? He could have just stopped. He could have been like, okay, fine, you win. I'm out though. I'm gone. I'm not going to continue this anymore. But instead he did it. And in doing so, I think he showed a certain disregard for his own life. Like he doesn't care whether he lives or dies. He's doing this because it's what needs to be done. And yet, by the time we get to this point, he's willing to almost forsake the memory of his own wife by giving up his wedding ring to this man just so he can continue living. And they say it's for the wife's sake, but it doesn't feel that way when he's been so on the verge of dying for the past two movies.
And so much of the first two movies were him... like the reason why he was upset about the dog, more than just the fact that it was an innocent dog, was because it was the dog his wife gave to him. The second movie, the bad guy destroyed his house and all of his photos of her, pretty much. Like, it was desecrating all these things that reminded him of her. So it should be a big deal that he's willing to give up that wedding ring for something. But it kind of felt like, I don't know, I just didn't get why the character was ready to make that sacrifice and choice. And they kind of try and flip it, obviously, when he eventually gets to Winston. And Winston knows he's there to probably kill him, and he's like, hey, do you really want to die as like their servant, just remembering her, or do you want to die as the man that she loved and die as a person rather than just like a tool for them? I didn't feel like they earned that John ever made that choice in the first place, so it felt all a little bit forced to me.
No, I think there needed to be a story arc, either in this movie or the last movie, where he makes the transition of it's not about the material thing that's her memory. It's not about the dog. It's not about the car. It's not about the material things. It's about the memory of it. That would then make more sense as to why he feels the need to live to carry on that memory. But they never quite did make that transition. They always stayed focused on the more material aspect of it.
Yeah, I think once John makes the choice in the scene with Winston that he's not going to be bad and he's going to like not kill him, and it's like, hey, okay, so you're going to war with the table then, Winston. He's like, yep, all right, I'm in. Like, once he makes that choice, I like the movie from then on. I like there's a siege coming, they're coming to take the Continental. John Wick's going to be with Sharon, they're going to defend the Continental with all the firepower they can muster. Like, once that hits, it's like, okay, this is back to feeling quite simple in a good way, where it's like, okay, this friendship between him and Winston matters now, and he's going to help defend the Continental. And I could see how this, like, whatever the result of this, I could see it, okay, it's going to change the world a bit for the fourth movie, and that's where we're going to go from there. I think just the plot beats of John making the choice he does, cutting off his finger and giving the head honcho his wedding ring, and seemingly just being like a whimpering dog in front of this honcho just felt a bit weird and off to me. Like,
yeah,
it's like they're trying to show that he has this much power, and that John's going to respect that power, and he's going to go through the ceremony and treat him with the respect he's supposed to give him. But it felt a bit off in the moment. I don't think the movie kind of built up to it properly, especially since he gets there by having his wandering journey in the desert and, like, you know, passing out and like. So this is how you talk to this guy. You have to go out to the desert and walk until you pass out, and then he might come and like pick you up.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the idea of we are sold on this franchise as John Wick. His talent set, the thing he does is kill. That is what he does. And this movie, for the entire second act, basically at the moment where you're saying it falls flat, is the moment where John says, "I don't want to kill anybody. I just want to talk." And it just it doesn't feel like it's properly set up. Like you said, it is a left turn, and it obviously we do still have fight scenes, we do still have big moments, but the reason that I think the desert scene falls so flat is there is no fight scene, there is no big moment. It's just a complete stall of everything that we've been doing up until then.
I mean, I would be fine with a quiet moment. I just don't think even the character choices in the scene make sense. So I didn't enjoy it for what it was doing. Because even in the second movie, whenever it did take a breather from the action, it was setting up or building to the next thing. So it was making the next action scene feel like a bigger deal.
But that's what I'm saying, is that I don't think that they set up in this movie that John would be the type to grovel. He's not the type to talk about that stuff. He's the type who is a strong, sturdy, steady man, a man of very few words, as we've seen before.
The one thing I was sort of latching onto while he was making this journey, I didn't like the whole desert thing. I didn't like kind of the trip to the desert either. But the one thing I was latching onto is like, he's lying, right? He's going to kill him. Like, that's what he's going to do.
Yeah.
He's going to get there and he's going to kill the mother effer, and that's going to be like his like stake for power and whatever. But no, he just grovels, and like when he goes to cut off his finger to prove that he's like willing to serve him, I was kind of like, like I get that you want to show the character at his lowest moment, you know, at the end of Act 2, and this is kind of the thing that he's going to come over, and but it just, I don't know, it did not feel like it fit anything that was happening with the character up until this moment for the previous 2.5 movies.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with that, in that when they reached, I thought he was going to try to kill the Elder as well, and every single time John backed down, the Elder seemed to like goad him. He seemed to say like a little extra thing of like, "You sure? And I'm going to make you do this." And then he just kept bowing.
And even so, the one thing I liked about it is that, okay, your first job to prove that you're loyal is to go kill Winston. I like that one part of it, just because, like, okay, that's a challenge for the character that's going to test his morals or whatever. But even then, my immediate thought was, he's making this trip back to Winston. And in my head, I was thinking, oh, he's not actually going to do it. Not in the sense that he's going to choose not to do it when he gets there. I thought, oh, he already knows he's not going to do it. This is all just him. Like, you know, there's already
the bravado, the show.
Yeah, it's the show. It's like, but when he gets to Winston, it suddenly becomes apparent. No, he was actually considering doing it, and he's making his choice now. Like, Winston's having to talk him out of it, and again, it kind of felt like, okay, like I keep having this expectation that I think is valid based on what they've shown me of this character, and in this movie, and a good chunk of it keeps testing that by having him not be the way that I feel like he should be. And I don't think I'm just making weird leaps. I think the movies before this have set up who this character is.
Yeah, I think the movies have really built themselves off of John is not a complicated man. He has very simple wants and very simple goals, and we have always managed to associate with that because the movies have shown us exactly what he wants. By the time this movie rolls around, we feel that we are in John's mindset. We can understand how he feels, how he thinks about the situation, but then the writers have him do something that goes against that. That is a different path than we think the character should go down. And of course, by the time he gets back to New York again, it's getting back in line with, okay, he has to kill, and that's what we associate with the character. I think that it's okay to make these changes to the character if they're properly set up. It just didn't feel that it was set up.
And I want to also expand on that. I don't think it's just that he has to kill. I think that the fact we also understand the reason and agree with the reason why he's going to kill. I think it's the important part, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, just before we get to all that third act stuff, though, we have to just backtrack a little bit and talk about all the Halle Berry.
We have to talk about the second black.
Yeah. Okay, well, we talked about the end of the second act when he actually gets to the shaman in the desert bollocks. But there's the trip to that where he goes to Casablanca and he meets up with Halle Berry, who's running the Continental that's here, right?
Morocco.
He's got a marker, right? And they set this up in the last movie. Someone owes him a favor with a marker. We find out it's because he got her daughter out of the system, right? And she doesn't even know where the daughter is because she knows if she knows where she is, she'll be too tempted to go and see her, and that could lead the people at the table to know where her daughter is, which could be used against her or whatever. So, okay, they set us up. It's a little bit, tell and don't show in the sense that they really sort of try and hammer home all this backstory with her losing her daughter. When they could have just hinted at it with one line and would have got it. And it felt like there was a whole scene where she's like, I don't even know where she is, John, because if I know, and like, I'm like, honestly, just saying, like, you got my daughter out, end, right? We can let our minds fill in the rest from there for now. But she's got two big dogs, and because this is the marker, she's agreed to take him to her old boss, which is this guy who's kind of like a more stereotypical, movie villain.
Which it is important to note that they set up the rules here that once you're excommunicated, all the markers and all the other stuff, everything, all the favors he's pulling in are technically void. Like nobody is beholden to that anymore. They're doing it strictly because they like John.
Like John, and perhaps it's just a sense of he is like taking a risk that they will still honor them because it is a matter of honor, as opposed to like, okay, technically you can choose not to do this now, but you care about our honor system. You care about like the fact that we follow these rules, and he's kind of banking on that, I think, a little bit. So they go, and the villain monologues for 8. This scene was like, obviously it gets good when the action starts because we get like John Wick plus 2 dogs and Halle Berry like fighting guy. Like it does it a couple times where the dog like will jump in and like bite the arm of a guy with like holding out his gun, and the dog will basically like bite with such velocity that the guy will like flip over the dog. And I was you know what, I'm into that part. That's kind of fun.
I do want to point out the villain. I know you're probably not familiar with him, but he's Jerome Flynn, and he got his big break as Bronn in Game of Thrones.
I knew you were going to say Game of Thrones. Every actor I don't know who's big for something is Game of Thrones.
It's fair, but he was definitely a fan favorite for at least the first bunch of seasons he was in. So it's worth noting.
But I didn't like his character at all. I thought this was just really, it was very much chewing the scenery. It was trying to be like. It felt like, how we had Peter Stormare at the start of the second one, and he was very much kind of a typical Russian mob boss, right? But it was kind of played as a little bit tongue-in-cheek because he's kind of like, he's intentionally the stereotype because he's talking about the Baba Yaga. It's meant to be this quick catch-up for, here's who John Wick is, here's a typical mob boss who's scared of him, and it sort of circumvents your expectations a little bit by having John just say, hey, we're at peace, right? And this guy, to show how much he's scared of John Wick, is like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, peace. Like, I'm out. I'll never come after you. We're good. It makes a point by setting up this stereotypical guy. Whereas here, the guy is just a villain, and he's going to do something villainous. Like, that he's going to shoot the dog when he says, I want to keep your dog. And Halle Berry says, no, you ain't keeping my dog. You know he's going to shoot the dog. You know exactly where it's going. And
as soon as he shoots the dog, I'm like, do you do you recognize the other person who's standing right next to, like, everyone has apparently heard this story, and you still want to shoot this dog.
Yeah, well, obviously the dog's wearing a bulletproof vest, which we find out quite quickly. I did think it was a little hypocritical of John, though, to be like, hey, can we go? And like, we don't kill this guy. And she shoots him in the leg, and she's like, he shot my dog. And John's like, I get it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, you can't point fingers here, Mr. Wick.
I mean, I fully, because, you know, it's a difference between a mob boss who has no seating at the table, and then this guy who is pretty much as high up as you can go without going into a desert. So I get why he doesn't quite want to bring down the entire system yet, but it is, again, like he says, he gets it. He sees it happen. He's like, all right, look, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Like, but I really wish you didn't do this.
And I enjoyed the ensuing shootout where the dogs were jumping in and helping. It was jumping between Halle doing some cool stuff, rolling under whatever. I enjoyed, I think it's later on, maybe it's this scene, but there's like a scene where John and the two guys he's fighting all run out of ammo, and they all have to reload, and John's just quicker at it, so he wins. But it's like, who can reload faster, because they all run out of ammo. Like, just, you know, and there's even like a bit of dog parkour where the dog like jumps off of Halle Berry's back and goes up the side of this wall to get to a guy up top.
If every scene is like some different rule set or some different tactic that needs to be done, this one is definitely the dogs as a weapon, because Halle Berry's character directs them with like, okay, do this, and she uses vocal commands to send the dogs after certain guys at certain times. It's a different, obviously it's less of the, you know, the choreography fight that we like, but I like how it brings in this different type of stunt acting.
Yeah, it's variety, and it feels very distinct to all the other fight scenes. And I think the fact that we're on the third movie and most of the fight scenes still feel very distinct is good, and I appreciate that. And it uses like different types of weapons, different types of allies, or, you know, whatever it may be. Sometimes it's location that makes it different, but like, they're still finding variety, and it feels like they're still being inventive. And it's probably the most important thing to the franchise, even though I do have some story problems with this one.
Yeah.
But as soon as this guy, like, back when they're talking, as soon as he says, "Oh, you don't see the Elder," like, the Elder sees you. If he chooses to, you travel out into the desert, get to the edge of the desert, and look into the sun, and blah blah blah. And I was like, why does this sound like the start of The Mummy when they're talking about how you find, you know, the hidden city? Like, that's what it sounds like. Why does it sound like that?
It's basically, he may as well have just handed John a scepter and said, like, put this on the crest of the dune as the sun hits noon, and where the light shines, start digging. And
like, just piss off with this shit. I got like a tinge of hate as soon as he started saying that. I was like, oh no, what is this doing now?
Like, I liked the start of it where he says, like, nobody can find the Elder. The Elder finds you. There's a reason that he is the Elder. He is above and beyond the system of you can just meet up with these people. I appreciate that sentiment, but it does come crashing down when he then directly tells him, here's how you can find the Elder. Because what those were, despite being all mystical hoo-ha, were still directions.
They were accurate, yes. This is exactly what John went and did. Honestly, probably the most straight up like comedy moment I think this series has ever tried to do is the moment where Halle Berry like drinks most of the water and just leaves him like a little dribble.
Spits it back into the bottle.
For his like trek into the desert. And that's the last you see of her. And I do expect that she'll pop up in 4 or 5 and she'll end up being an ally, no doubt, down the line. You
say that, but I feel like, here's the thing. I don't know how she was received, considering we're watching this 3 years later.
Sure.
If she wasn't received very well, which she very well may not have been, I don't think she's coming back, because her entire plot was pretty much wrapped up, and she basically straight up said, like, we're done. This happens and then we're done.
Don't get me wrong, it would work if she never does, but I suspect that this is someone that will appear again. It just makes too much sense to me to have her pop up as an ally, like maybe like 4 will introduce someone else, and then maybe in 5, if 5 is the last one, where all of the people that he's kind of allies with end up like banding together to take on the table or something like that, you know?
Right.
I could totally see that being a thing. You know, the John Wick Vengers, if you will.
He's just going to be standing there, single bullet in his gun, facing down the entire high table, and then all of a sudden, on your left.
And the dog comes out of the portal, yes.
Yep, exactly. Not only his dog, but also a multiversal version of Daisy, the first dog, comes out. So one bunch of scenes that we've been skipping over is what the educator has been doing this entire time.
Oh, yeah. It made sense to leave this separate, yeah.
So we obviously talked about when Saul Whiston says, get your affairs in order, and you have 7 days. But she also makes another trip to Laurence Fishburne.
She's been watching The Ring. She's like, in 7 days, you will die.
Yeah. I mean, if she was just a little bit creepier, I could see her trying to play that off as like 7 days and just walk off without a word.
Yeah, she goes to see Laurence Fishburne, and this is the thing, we were talking last movie about how the Bowie's outside of the system, and it still is, but there was a moment here I thought, well, is it part of the system? And I think the scene by the end, it makes it clear that, no, this is something that was set up independently, but the table are aware of it and sort of like allow it to exist, so now that they've decided that something has to change, they still think they can like boss them around.
Yeah. I think it's the equivalent of like the United States recognizing a smaller like break off of a state. They're like, no, you're allowed to exist right up until we say you aren't.
Yeah. So he's also told 7 days. And that's when she goes to the Assassin Zero and enlists him and his men to act out their will, which is to basically go and punish anyone who was working with John Wick. So they go to the Russian ballet place, and the woman who helped John Wick there is stabbed through the hands as penance. Then later on, Laurence Fishburne slashed 7 times, one for each bullet that was in that gun that you gave him last movie.
And it seems that he dies.
It looks like he dies, yeah.
He gets pretty cut up pretty bad.
Yeah. I mean, I was still kind of thinking he'd probably pop up again, which he does.
Oh,
but, yeah. But yeah, they play it like he might have killed over and died at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Unless there is actual visible proof that he is dead. I was sitting there like, all right, so he's just going to be the Sam Jackson at the end of Iron Man. Like, you think that you're out of the game, John Wick?
Well, here's my weird thing, is that, so the Elder gives John a task, says that they're going to drop the open contract, and his first task is to go and kill Winston for helping him. And John agrees, gets his new suit, because he was wearing the suit from the last movie up until this point. Like he'd been wearing that same suit for ages.
Yep.
And he goes back to New York, and I was thinking, okay, so now that he's got this job, surely he won't be attacked when he gets back, because like he's doing a mission for the Elder.
Yeah.
But there's still tons of assassins coming from him. Not only that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I did enjoy the little moment where there's a couple of random assassins who are coming to attack him, and then the Japanese group who are working for the Adjudicator jump out and kill all those assassins. But then they also try to attack John. I'm like, why are you trying to attack? It feels like is upper management not relaying the tasks down the chain?
Honestly, I don't think they did. I think that until John manages to complete the task, he is still able to be killed, which I'm okay with. But then, yeah, there's that moment where Zero's gang kills the assassins and just lets him walk into Grand Central Station, where then they try to kill him again. And that's the part that I think was only explained towards the end of the movie, where Zero basically says, no one's allowed to kill you but me. And I think what it basically come down to is once he got back into the city while Zero's on the case, Zero is basically killing anybody who's getting close to John so that he can be the one that does it.
Yeah, and then we get the motorbike chase.
Yes.
Outside the station.
The motorcycle ninja. Because it is worth noting, in all the scenes where Zero's gang is attacking, it's just Foot Clan. It's just ninjas.
Yeah, it's the Foot Clan. You're right.
Like, they're coming out of the shadows, they're doing quick silent kills with swords, and then they're hiding back in the shadows again. It is...
New York is the Turtles' home as well. I'm just saying, if they want to do a John Wick Turtles like team-up movie, I'm not against it.
I would love that more than I think I should.
Come on.
I think it would work so well.
John Wick versus Shredder? Come on.
Yeah, no, I fully could have seen an ending to this movie where Zero gets his face slashed instead of getting stabbed, and it's just like, oh, look what they're doing.
I want it now. And I'm going to be disappointed that John Wick 4 doesn't have the 4 turtles in it. So, yeah, some of the chase is fun. Like, I like him again aiming for the necks because the helmets obviously are helping block the bullets. There's a nice moment where one bike like sort of flips into another bike and like takes the guy out. There's some fun moments in there, but it is obviously a lot more effects heavy as a sequence because of just what it is. But they get to the Continental and John literally puts his hand on the first step, and then Sharon walks out and is like, "Put down your weapon, Zero." He's on Continental grounds now. So he's here to see, obviously, Winston.
Which I do like, because that, despite the fact he's excommunicated, and Zero makes that point, Sharon does still point out, you are not allowed to fulfill contracts on Continental grounds.
Yes.
Like, even if he is a target that's not part of the game, more or less, as soon as he's there, you cannot take that shot.
Yeah. And he goes in and he talks to Winston, and this is where he's given his choice. And Winston gives him the speech about dying as the hitman for the table or dying as the man who lost his wife. And like, who do you want to die as? What do you think she would want more out of them? And obviously, I appreciate John making the choice that he does, because it is. I just never feel like he was in a place to like even have to make that choice before. And now it feels like the fact that he was even tempted to like go the other way was kind of weird. But I do like that it's like, okay, Winston's making this choice to not just give in. He's basically declaring war on the table to keep the Continental. And it's like, okay, they're going to send an army. And it's like, okay, John, are you up for helping? And this is where we get the Matrix line, where he's like, okay. And he's like,
what do you need, John?
What do you need? Guns. Lots of guns. And honestly, it works so well in context. Like, while it is like a reference and a wink wink, it feels like it fits so well in the moment that it didn't bother me. I was like, okay, you know what? That worked.
I think the real test of those lines is if somebody had not seen The Matrix, would they think that was out of place? And I can't see any reason they would think it'd be out of place at all. Yeah,
no, because the story's set up. Because I think even the last movie, he had a line at one point where he said he needs lots of guns. Like, it wasn't that line, but it was similar enough to it that this didn't feel like it was a sudden left turn for the character, you know?
One scene that we skipped over, which I don't particularly like, but that's why I feel like I need to bring it up, is the kind of sit-down scene between John and Zero.
Oh, when they're waiting, it's in the lobby area before he goes to see Winston,
Yeah, and Zero basically just turns out to be like a super fan. He's just like, John, me and you were like the same. We both assassins. And John's like, shut up, man.
Yeah, he sits down next to, because John's on the couch, and he sits down right next to him on the couch, so they're touching, and John like awkwardly gets up and sits in another chair. Yeah, I'll be honest, this made him way less interesting. Is that he's a fanboy, honestly. Yeah. There's like
pretty much. I like the fact that he sees John as not an idol, but a person to work towards, a goal to get to as a hitman. I like that aspect, but he basically threw that out and went into fanboy territory the moment when the dog jumped up onto John's lap. He's like, oh, is this like the dog? I'm more of a cat person myself, but like, cool, awesome. And I'm like, all right, man, just tone it down.
Yeah, I wasn't into that. Like, see if you tell me that the arch nemesis is the guy who might be the new John Wick, and like he's building up to John Wick because he might be taking his place as like the new Baba Yaga. I'll be okay. That's kind of interesting because eventually everyone gets replaced, and John's in his 50s, he's getting older. Oh, shout out to Keanu Reeves. Like, he's obviously doing a lot of physical stuff in this movie, and well, obviously there's stuntmen for certain things. He's still moving super quick in some of the fight scenes, but it's still clearly him. Like, he's for a man in his 50s, he's doing very well. Like I'm almost curious to see, like, if we're going to notice over 4 and 5, is there going to be to be a dip in like how quick he can move, because he is, he's pushing 60. Like,
I mean, isn't that the whole thing though, that Keanu Reeves is immortal? Isn't that the meme online?
I mean, that's the meme until it's no longer true.
Yeah.
Like, eventually the age is going to hit him, and he's not going to be able to move as quickly. And it's why watching like Harrison Ford and Indiana Jones in 2008 was hard to watch, because he couldn't move the same way that he used to. So I don't even know how the new one's going to deal with it, but we'll see. We'll see.
All of a sudden, he's going to be really, really good with his guns.
Yeah. So, yeah, we get this choice. And, this is where I start to get excited again, because, okay, now it's about him, this kind of friendship he's had with Winston. He's now going to repay, like, giving him that hour from the end of the last movie to, okay, I'm going to help you defend this place. I'm going to, like, take on the table with you.
And it is a point where the adjudicator, as soon as they've made their decisions to her, she's like, okay. And she just gets on the phone and says, cancel the consecration of this building. So now contracts can be fulfilled within it.
And we even get like like the SWAT team coming in the lobby, and it's not like the scene in The Matrix, but because he said the Matrix line, I was kind of thinking, oh, we're doing a big scene in a lobby. Okay.
Yeah, I do like right before that though, because obviously this hotel is, a cover for hitmen, but I think it is also just a hotel as well. Like other people can just walk in and say, "Can I have a room?" and pay with actual money. So I like the point where they have to straight up say, like, the hotel is being fumigated, everybody get out now. Like, they have to have some reason to get the normal people out of there, which we did skip over in Grand Central Station. The Zero and John are about to attack each other, and then a random group of people just jump in the middle.
I think it was mostly kids as well. I think it was like a group of school kids walking through the middle of them.
But Zero makes the point of, see, John, that's why you're special. I wouldn't have stopped. So that goes back to what we were talking about before, is John more moral than the average hitman in this world? And I think that's the proof that, yes, he is. He's willing to make sure that innocent bystanders are completely safe.
Yeah. Also, I think we'll see Common again. Because I was expecting him to show up in this movie, because he didn't die in the last one, but I think he might pop up later in another movie.
I since you mentioned the John Wick Vengers, I'm as soon as they decide this is the last movie, I'm expecting everyone to come in.
Yeah, that's how I feel. But anyway, so yeah, a lot of fun action here. I love that like these SWAT guys come in and they're all in body armor, so a lot of the bullets are just bouncing off the armor, and John's having to go for necks. He's having to go for the places that it'll work. And then
Sharon joins the fight as well.
Sharon joins the fight as well. And I love that they lose a lot of the other guys that are with Sharon. And then both Sharon and John, after having a bit of a fight where they take out the first wave, they come back to the safe room where Winston's hiding and just having like a drink. And they're like, shit, we need more firepower. And Sharon's like, hey, these shotgun shells, these are armor piercing. And they both like just load up with these shotgun shells and go back out. And again, more fun reloading stuff where John's he's got like it's like 4 or 5 shells around like this sort of like quick holster thing where he kind of slides them in one by one, but they're on this like rack so he can do it really quickly.
He does it so fast.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that's one of the things where he got really, really good at it, and they just wanted to show off how good he was.
Oh yeah, for sure. So yeah, a lot of fun stuff here with the action choreography again. And then obviously eventually it leads to the glass room where it's ultimately Zero, but he actually takes on. He's got like, I don't think they're actually twins, but they've got very similar looks. These two guys, they've both got the same sort of goatee and like tied back hair. But they're like, hey, it's an honor to fight you, John Wick. So they actually help him up at one point so they can like fight properly. And they've got their sort of curved blades, and John's got his belt, and they have this fight. What I liked about the way they used the glass in this section of the movie is they did this thing. In fact, my favorite moment of this whole scene is when like one of the henchmen gets his machete or whatever it is stuck in the edge of the glass because it sort of goes in a little bit, and John grabs a second guy and just like swipes his throat over it. It's just like and it's like, oh, that was a very inventive way to use a machete on someone.
Oh, absolutely. You put the person into the knife. Like that's perfect. No, I like the glass stuff in this scene. I think that they made it creative, but basically I think what they've set up with John is that he's very good at hiding. He's very good at like sneaking up and like getting the drop on people.
Although, on that note, I will say the way he Batmans out of the scene in Grand Central was maybe a little too magical.
You say that, but then all of the ninjas were just literally Batmaning around him, and they made the point of like one of them just managed to cross this line like next to Zero over to the side of John Wick, and then John just grabs him and beats the crap out of him and says like, was that your guy?
That's fair, but I will extend that to say that I didn't like any of that.
All right, fair enough.
I thought that was too like supernaturally Batmaning around. Like, the way they were just disappearing into like thin air.
I took it as more of a comedy beat than anything else.
No, it was a comedy beat, but I just still think it was too far. I think it was too far in like, no, this is supernatural almost what they're doing now.
Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, back to the glass. I think that this is a good counter for John in that, again, he really likes to be able to hide behind things. He likes his cover systems, and he likes to be able to get the drop on people. And this just robs him of that. So you can see he's at a clear disadvantage, especially because, like they comment in the thing, he's older, he's been in retirement, and for the past 2 weeks, he has done nothing but fight.
Yeah, and I think what I like about this set piece in this location, especially as the fight goes on, and it does this a lot throughout the scene, especially when he's fighting Zero, is that you can't really tell where there's glass and where there isn't, right? So it's like, oh, there's a barrier that you don't expect or whatever. But what I like about it is that as the scene goes on and they're hitting each other into the glass and it starts to crack, is that you kind of like build the scene. That you slowly realize what the boundaries of the fight are. You don't get it at first, but as they hit into each other and they hit into the glass, it starts, all these cracks form like a new set almost. It's actually really interesting from a design point of view.
It's that sort of thing like in mystical shows and sci-fi shows when you're fighting an invisible opponent and then you just get a little bit of ink on them or something like that to show here's where they are. It's that same thing, but it's for the entire set where it's, we have all these invisible walls and one by one we're just gonna figure out where they are.
Yeah, I thought that made it very inventive, and again, it assured me that they have not ran out of ideas on how to like build these like unique fight scenes that all have their own thing, their own little gimmick or structural or design quality that makes them feel distinct, and at times just kind of cool, where it feels like, okay, this is very different to anything else we saw already in this movie.
I can't guarantee it, but I'm gonna go ahead and I'll put a $5 tip on the review of John Wick 4, coming from my own wallet, that there will be a pitch black fight scene, because that just seems like the next logical thing of like nobody can see anything.
Well,
how do they fight?
I'm going to elaborate on that. I think it'll be a pitch black scene that is only lit by gunfire.
That's fair.
I think you'll get flashes of light from gunfire. That's my guess.
If there isn't that though, I get top billing on all future reviews. Anyway, moving on. So
what does that mean? You're doing the intro?
Oh no, it's too much responsibility. Never mind.
Okay, all right.
You can keep it.
Very well. All right. So yeah, I mean, they have the fight scene, and this character, because he's lost a bit of his mystique, I do think his ending where he's got the sword in him and he's kind of like, I'll catch up, John, I just need to get my breath. And it's like, no, you won't. Like, I was like, this is he comes across a bit too lame at this point, where I don't really believe that he's a threat.
See, but that's why I think that line from John actually works there, because I'll catch up not only implies physically I'll be right in after you, it's also the I'll get to your level. And John just turns back and be like, no, you won't.
Oh yeah, I mean, to be clear, I don't have a problem with John's response. It's just kind of like the other guy's demeanor, and like, you know, I almost feel like his entire character's kind of played for a joke at this point, as opposed to actually being like a threat. But because everyone that they've sent in has been defeated, the adjudicator's like, all right, parley. So they have this parley on the roof, and
specifically without John.
John comes in halfway through the scene, but she's talking to Winston, and she's like, so what are you even trying to do? And like, it's like, well, I've got to keep the Continental, blah blah blah. And she basically is like, wait, this was all a show of force to show that you're still of value to the table. Okay, done. But what about Wick? Because by this point, John Wick's standing there. It's like, what about him? We can't just let everything that's happened go away. And this is the heel turn where Winston turns and shoots John. And John's wearing the bulletproof suit, so he's kind of he's not getting shot per se. I mean, he's getting shot, but he's not getting hit. He's just kind of like sort of like blocking it with he's like, what the hell? But obviously the force of the impact, and he's at the edge of the building, he ends up falling over the edge of the roof. He slides down like a skylight bit or whatever it is, and then into like a fire escape, and then onto a dumpster. And
he does that thing from Spider-Man 2.
Yes.
When he just boom, 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 dead.
To the point where, you're kind of stretching like, he should be dead. He should be dead.
Oh, absolutely.
He should be so dead. And it's like, okay. And part of me was almost expecting, like, is when she left the scene and it was just him and Sharon left, I really thought he was going to say something like, that's okay, I knew he'd survived that. Or you know, something to imply that he wasn't actually just straight up turning bad. But obviously the way it plays out, it's like, nah, maybe he did just make this cold choice.
See, you say that, but the same, I think that he did it. Maybe he did make the cold choice, but I think he still expected John to somehow miraculously survive it, because she comes back and says, hey, I just checked the alley. John isn't there. And he's like, oh, wow. We'll definitely take care of him. Sure. And she's like, good. See what you do. And he's like, yeah, anyway.
No, I mean, that's true. Maybe like, but at the same time, it still feels like John will rightfully be pissed at him. And
absolutely.
You know, the friendship is not going to be at its strongest, needless to say. I do think it's an interesting direction to go in, that he's kind of like went back to the table with his tail between his legs because he likes his position, and now he's part of the system. Like, he's reinforced as part of the system, and therefore John like can't trust him anymore. That is an interesting direction to go in for the next movie, which actually reminds me of one of they put this in the trailer. I remember seeing the trailer when it was coming out, but there's a line early on where when Winston goes back to the Continental, and Sharon's like talking about, hey, do you really think John is going to survive? And he's like, well, he's got every assassin in the city coming after him, and he's hurt and weak. I give it 50-50. What I liked about that line in the context of the movie itself, it's a fine enough trailer line, but in the context of the movie, it's like, you know what, John Wick's been talked up by everyone. Since the start of the first movie, the whole thing is, no, you mess with John Wick, you are screwed. He's coming for you. It's been that the whole time, and for a second, it's like, wait, are they setting up that he's actually going to say that John's in trouble here? That he's finally against the odds, and that it's unlikely that, I mean, we expect that he will because he's the main character, but they're finally saying in the context of in the universe of the movie that he maybe doesn't stand a chance now, and still he's like 50-50, which is the worst odds he's had in the context of the movie. This is the worst odds anyone's given him since this franchise started, is 50-50. But yes, so but so the end of the movie, we have this fall to the death. He disappears, and the end of the movie is that the Bowery King is alive. The homeless guy, the one from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, has brought him to the Bowery King, and the Bowery King's like, the table mess with me. They're going to learn not to mess with the Bowery, and that they are not the be all and end all. We're going to rise up and show them that they're not like infallible. And it's like, John, I'm really pissed off. And the whole time, like, John's clearly moving and alive, but he's hurt, his face is down, and he sort of sticks his head up and says, yeah, I'm pissed. And that's when it cuts to credits. It's like, now John has a motive. Now John is determined to take down this system and get revenge, just in a broad sense, not just, obviously it was revenge in the first movie for the killing of the dog and whatnot, but now it's like, no, now he's pissed at the table. He's pissed at the system and the people in it. So
in general, what I think in terms of structure, for now that there is Chapter 5 confirmed as well, I think that what happened was, the first movie was its own standalone thing. It could have existed without any sequels. It was a fine enough thing on its own.
Absolutely, yeah.
Then they got the next 2 chapters confirmed, or at least they figured they were getting a trilogy out of it. And so they built a trilogy setup. They built the ability of, okay, second movie is where John's going to be at his lowest. He's got the entire system against him. And third is where he rises up and overtakes it. But then, as they're working on the third movie, or possibly in pre-production, they're told, hey, you can have more movies as well. So then they have to pivot again of, actually, no, the second movie isn't where he's at his lowest. The third movie is going to be where he's at his lowest. And then he's going to rise back up over the course of 4 and 5. Because obviously, in terms of just 3-act structure, you want the midpoint to be where your character is at their lowest. So in terms of all 5 movies, assuming we stop at 5, we would have to make it where the third movie is where he truly has nowhere else to go. He is at the lowest point. But that's why I think that this movie kind of falters in what it's trying to do, in that the last movie was obviously supposed to be the lowest, and they were going for a trilogy. And it was only once they then had to pivot out of that to a full franchise, more or less.
A pentology.
A pentology, exactly. They now have to change it so the new structure is here. And that's kind of the whole issue of writing for the sequel as well. In writing for this bigger grand idea that you're doing over the course of multiple movies, rather than focusing on making this one movie being a good thing, is, I like the world building. I like the stuff that they've set up. The Elder might be a bit of a step too far, but in general, I like the things they've done here, of the Bowery King versus the High Table and all these different aspects to it.
I mean, fundamentally, what you said last time, you said, oh, you expect the Bowery King to play a big part because he's outside the system and that's someone that John may be able to go to. We said that, and effectively that's what they're doing. They just didn't do it as part of this movie. It's like, no, this is the end, the very end of the movie, setting up that is the setup for the fourth movie, is that they are going to be taking on the table, and they've got a reason to be aligned together now.
Which is why I think that the entire next 2 movies worth of plot is probably what they intended to do for this movie before they had to pivot. The High Table was going to go down in the third movie, or at least John was going to be able to get them off his ass. But now they have to extend it out. It's just made this movie kind of a consequence of, okay, we're still going to make it that things change, that things happen, but it feels a lot more padded out of, like you said, that entire second act is completely worthless. It was just setting up this higher world building aspect to it.
Yeah, and that's something I never had a problem with in the second movie. I never felt the second movie, the pacing was so good, and it felt like it was the natural middle point of the whole story in all the right ways. Whereas this feels that there is kind of this weird pivot and transition because it's having to go bigger because now we're getting at least another 1 or 2 movies after this, you know. And I would be fascinated because they didn't announce 4 and 5 until after 3 came out. But I would be fascinated to internally know when they kind of had an inkling that there's going to be more after this.
I don't know about internally. I did read that there, just in terms of the release schedule. So this film was released May 9th, 2019.
Mm-hmm.
The sequel, like the Chapter 4, which is just, of course, coming out next week as of release of this video, it was announced on May 20th, 2019.
Yeah.
So it was announced like 3 weeks afterwards to the public.
Which probably means that they were told before it came out, is assuming that the third one still performs as well as 2 did, you're probably getting more. Because they announced 4 and 5 together. It was like a package deal. And I think part of that is locking in Keanu for them because, you know, he is getting older and maybe it's like, hey, we want 2 more. Let's lock them in, film them pretty close together. You know, I think he's going to be in Ballerina as well to like help set up that world and like, you know, what that movie's doing. And that's all fine. So,
and obviously this movie, or sorry, Chapter 4 coming out was significantly delayed because of COVID, and also they had to wait until he was done with Matrix. What was the new one?
Resurrections.
Resurrections. That's it.
There you go. No, like obviously, yeah, it was delayed and whatever, which is fine. I think this movie does suffer from having to pivot, and I think the mythology that they add into this one, and maybe in some of it was always intended. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But either way, I don't like some of the stuff they add in this one, which is the first time in the franchise that I felt that way about the mythology. So hopefully I think the more they can keep away from this elder douchebag in the desert in the next one, the happier I'll be. And
I fully expect that the next movie we're going to see the elder come into the city. Like they're just going to purposely make him like any other person that we've encountered before, where you can just find him on a rooftop drinking wine or whatever.
Yeah, I could see it. So hopefully because there's still obviously great action in this. There's the siege stuff towards the end. The setup of John being pissed going into it. The only thing that hurts that setup of John being pissed at the end is that because his character felt like it was making weird choices in the middle, it kind of hurts like being completely invested in his like state of mind by the end. But you know, removing kind of the steps to get there, like, you know, am I into what potentially the fourth movie could be? I am. But I think clearly out of these first 3, the second movie is the best one. Like I think the second one is the best. I think some of the action scenes in this are probably better than the first movie, but overall, I think this one has bigger problems than the first one.
Yeah, because that is always a thing of, you can have a movie with no action that has a super compelling plot. That is obviously well done, but you're never going to have a good movie that's filled with action but doesn't have anything to link it together. The plot is necessary to making it work, and this one had just enough issues with the in-between action scene moments to really make it that extra thing.
Yeah, Act 1 and Act 3, solid stuff. But that middle act, holy shit, like I was not into that middle act at all. So it's a real shame because it's kind of like, it feels like a lesser movie than 2. I think it's weaker than the first one, despite the fact that some of the individual action scenes I think are better. Like I think that knife scene in the shop with all the knives, I think I like that action scene more than any action in the first movie. But I can't elevate the whole movie above it because of that, because fundamentally, even though the first one had some problems and we talked about those in that first review, it doesn't have this giant sagging thing I don't like in the middle, which is a big problem. So with all that said, I suppose it's time to rate John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum. So
yes,
what have you got in mind?
Well, obviously, with everything we talked about, it's got to be a 10. No. Yeah, again, it is weaker than part 2. And honestly, I think that for me personally, while I do appreciate the action scenes, I do think that it's what makes John Wick John Wick. I am so invested in their world building and the sort of rules that they set up that once you reach this point that the movie did with getting outside of the rules and getting more to some weird mystical elements, it kind of takes away from me. So the one thing that I was the most invested in has actually been weakened in this movie. So despite giving the last one an 8.5 and the first movie an 8, I'm going to drop this one the whole way down to a 7. I think that while there is a good amount going into it, it is still, like you said, the weakest film overall.
Well, I mean, I gave the second one an 8 and the first one a 7. So, and I'm saying this is weaker than the first one. So, by that nature, like I could give it a 7 as well and say it's just a weaker 7, but I don't think it is a 7. I think this is, because of the stuff I don't like in this, I think I'm going as low as a 6 on this one. And there's still stuff I like in it. There's still enjoyable stuff to get into. There's still great action scenes. But that middle section, like if I wasn't watching this for review, like that's the sort of part of the movie where I might have paused it to get a break and then just never go back. That's exactly what that middle big chunk is to me, is that I might have, like, not because out of like protest or like, oh, this is, I'm never going to watch, but it's the sort of thing where I might just instinctively I'll watch the rest of it later and then just never get around to it because the middle was not for me at all.
I watched this pretty much right before we recorded. I was a little short on time, but once he started walking through the desert, I did take the time to pause the movie and just take care of some other things I needed to do, because I felt like that was the point where I was like, all right, I could probably leave it unpaused and I still wouldn't feel like I was missing that much, but I didn't want to do a disservice to the review if I happened to actually miss something. So
there you go. That's John Wick Chapter 3.
Secondary rating scale.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Does it manage to drop off of a clean makes the cut, or is it still there?
No, I think we're definitely cutting it close territory with this one.
Cutting it close? I think that, yes, it is cutting it close, but it is a very high cutting it close. It just barely misses the makes the cut for me.
I think it's cutting it close, and it's elevated to cutting it close comfortably because it's connected to the first two movies. I think if this was standalone, it may be a bit of a hairier cutting it close.
I mean, obviously, I don't think we would ever say, yeah, just have John Wick 3 and nothing else, even if it was a good movie, because it can't stand alone. It requires you to watch the other movies. But if they somehow restructured the film that it could stand on its own, but still have the same sort of pacing and plot, it would be a lot less than what it currently is. It is only by virtue of the previous two films that it is so high up.
Yeah. So there you go. That is John Wick Chapter 3. So we'll record these a bit in advance, so it's a little bit of time for us before we get to 4. But for you guys watching the reviews or listening to the reviews, next week we will be here with John Wick Chapter 4, and we'll see what the new entry does, what it's like, and how it pays off the ending to Part 3. So
I could be wrong on my dates, but I think it was actually just released yesterday as of release of this video.
Well, it doesn't matter. The point is that it's next episode, so it's still next week.
I'm just saying, people will know. The reviews will be out by now. People can hear, but don't listen to them. Listen to us only.
Don't complicate things. The next episode's our review of John Wick 4. That's all that matters.
Fair enough.
Right? There's no confusing elements to that. It's just next episode we talk about it. That's that simple. So yes, look forward to that. And of course, coming up after John Wick, we're doing video game movies to tie into the new Mario animated movie coming out. So look forward to that. That's coming soon. And of course, don't forget those bonus episodes and other things you can see over at Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. At the $3 tier, you get a bonus episode every month where we do a movie that kind of either ties into the theme that we've got going on, or at least feels like sort of similar enough. Like, so for this month we did Peppermint, which is a sort of action revenge movie. starring Jennifer Garner. So that's a bit looser of a connection than sometimes where it's more of like a spin-off movie or something that is like a direct-to-video kind of like tangentially related movie to the franchise or whatever it is.
We'd be doing Ballerina if we could.
Well, I don't think so.
No? You think that would just be a normal?
I think that would just be in the theme. Yeah, that'd just be a regular episode. Because it's too much of a high-profile movie coming out.
Yeah, that's fair.
You know?
It's not quite the A- tier that we usually aim for.
So, yeah, go check out that. And of course, we also now have Collector's Cut Extra Reels at the $5 tier where we watch a So Bad It's Good, hopefully anyway, So Bad It's Good movie and talk about that. We've done Deadly Prey, we've done Miami Connection, and for this month, we did or are doing, depending on when it's released, Dangerous Men. So look out for those if you're into that kind of thing. Plus, there's bonuses for other shows that we do, such as Streams After Midnight and the Atomic Cinema Experiment. So if you want to show your support, help keep all the content coming, head over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and you can do all that over there. But you can also help us for free by simply liking, subscribing, dinging the bell for notifications, make sure you're watching the stuff, share it out on the Twitters or whatever social media platforms you use. All those things do help. And of course, giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast from. Any of those things do help out a lot. So if you enjoy the show, do one, some, or all of those things. So
you will be of service. You will have served.
Yes, very good. So that is the show. That is the Collector's Cut. Thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies. And yeah, I'm thinking I'm pissed off. I wish he said it like that at the end. That'd have been funny.
Yeah.